Salutations and welcome to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today on the podcast, we are so excited to talk planetary magic and all things mystical with our special guest, Mr. Rufus Opus. Rufus is the author of the widely acclaimed magical tome, The Seven Spheres Book, which is described as the practice manual for Hermetic planetary magic, which uses specific rituals to help the magician self-actualize their own reality, using specific energies and forces attributed to the seven classical spheres. Rufus is also a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, and is an overall gentleman, scholar, and practitioner of Yi art. In this podcast, we discuss these issues, the big pitfalls of magic, and Rufus also spares no expense offering his friendly jabs and compliments against other mages such as Aaron Leach, Frater Ashen Chasan, and Jake Stratton Kent. He also offers his own ideas about what really makes magic work. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Mr. Rufus Opus. Rufus, thank you so much for coming on the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, the pleasure is certainly mine, Rufus, truly. Really appreciate your time. And, of course, we'll also talk about how you have a reputation to clink glasses with other well-known grimoire magicians in the occult community. But
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Perhaps that's why they call it occult. It's just a hidden thing.
It's the secret bourbon club.
Rufus, before we get to that, can you tell our listeners a little bit about how the eventual author of a magical planetary ritual book and a member of the OTO even got started in magical pursuits? How did this whole thing begin for you?
If you really want to know the absolute truth, and this is something I don't think I've ever told anybody, my grandparents owned a bowling alley. And in the bowling alley was on, the ground floor. You could go into the bowling alley on the ground floor from the street. And there was a bar. And their apartment was upstairs from the bar. And every summer I would spend 3 to 6 weeks with my grandparents. And I would just go bowling every day. And in the bar, to get down to the bar, you would come down this flight of stairs that wrapped around, and underneath the stairs was a rock garden with running water and garden gnomes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no kidding, gnomes, right? And I got to go into the bar when it was closed and make myself pizzas and stuff, and it was a great way to grow up. And honestly, I trace all of my occult interests back to those stupid gnomes hanging out in this little enclave. And they were like lit in this weird way. It was back in this back corner of a smoky, dingy bar because you could still smoke in the 70s and 80s when I was going there, and it was just a very magical scene, and when all the lights are off in the bar and the only things that are on are the Pac-Man game that you get to play for free and the lights that are lighting up the gnomes, and there's some mushrooms and vines and just this totally surreal scene of the hidden wonderland behind the corners. It just sort of seeped into my subconscious mind that there was something beautiful and unmanifest in nature. And my grandfather was a very devout evangelical, and he had the Chick tracts. And I learned about the occult from Jack Chick. So in the bathroom, he had these stacks of these little comic books that were warning against the evils of Satan and the occult, and I'm like reading this stuff up, and I'm like, and somehow I connected the occult with these stupid gnomes, right? So eventually, once I grew up a little bit and I realized that Christians were completely full of crap, I started researching cults because I remembered cult and I didn't understand the difference between cult and occult. But basically, since I was 6 years old, I've been fascinated with the hidden world. Part of the reason that the gnomes are so interesting to me is because they winked at me, like I saw him move a little bit. And there was a vibe and a feeling, because, they had seen so much crap in that bar. And, they kind of had lives of their own, and they had their own personalities. And it was just, it was an early exposure to a spiritual nature spirit kind of thing that was accepted in society, even in a bar that was owned by a fundamentalist Christian.
Wow. So that experience led to it kind of kindled the latent embers of your own, curiosity, your own interest in the occult. Did that interest carry over? Did those pesky gnomes push you to look even further and deeper into occult pursuits?
Well, not so much directly. I started looking up cults. I learned about how cults influence the mind, and I got into the psychological aspect of what occultism is supposed to represent, and tapping into the different parts of your mind and the way people abuse that in like the satanic panic stuff from the 80s. And I kind of, I don't know. I thought that it was all just kind of hokum for a long time, and I shelved it. And then when I was like 16, I moved to Denver, and all of a sudden had access to all these wonderful occult shops, and the Tattered Cover bookstore that had a wonderful occult section. And I started actually looking at these books, and Donald Michael Craig, of course, was my first introduction to magic, and I learned the LBRP, and I still say the LBRP with a mild Texas accent. So it's like te malkuth, and I can't quite shake that, but yeah, I mean, basically, once I got into Donald Michael Craig, he mentioned Crowley, and then I bought Liber Abba, book 4, and I read all of it because I was working a night shift job, and I had nothing else to do. So, and I mean, from there, I got into Robert Anton Wilson and chaos magic for a long time.
Yes.
That was interesting, but virtually completely ineffective. It was a great way to play mind games with yourself and convince yourself that you were doing things without actually experiencing anything. I got married a couple times, and for a while I got back into fundamentalist Christianity to try to save the last marriage, and of course it failed. And once I got back out of that, getting back into my occult roots, I basically started doing Liber Samek, which is Crowley's version of the headless rite, the pornless rite from the Greek magical papyri, where it's sort of based on it. I would say loosely based on it, but it is a really good ritual to kind of get in touch with your, I don't want to say higher self necessarily, but the entity that is manifest as the holy guardian angel. I started doing that, and I glossed over my time as a fundamentalist Christian, but it was about 2 or 3 years of pretty deep soul searching kind of ecstatic mysticism kind of stuff. I spoke in tongues. I would pray for an hour or two every morning. I spent a lot of time doing what Crowley would call inflaming yourself with prayer. I spoke in tongues, which is glossolalia. I could rattle some off now if I felt like it, but it's just a matter of doing a lot of deep personal introspection and throwing yourself 100% at God was sort of what my approach was, and the failure of the church to be able to provide the structure and explanation of the experiences I was having when I was doing that sort of helped undermine my fundamentalist outlook. But eventually, I trashed the Christianity thing and went right into Samek. And after a few weeks of doing Samek in my body of light to the best of my ability, and basically, I mean, I'd been doing this since I was 16, and I think I was 30, maybe 30, 29, 30, I don't know. It was 2006. It was 11 years ago. So I would have been like 31 or 32, I guess. So yeah, so I attained knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian angel, and I basically nearly shit myself. It was that intense of an experience, you know. So
wow.
After that, I was like, what am I supposed to do next? So I started reading through the Obermelin books, right? And what does Obermelin say that you do after you attain knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel? It says, the first thing you do is you summon the 4 demonic kings and work your way down through the hierarchies until you get 4 elemental spirits that will obey you. And they're the people that you go through from then on. I was like, okay, so obviously I have to do that, right? And I asked my holy guardian angel, and he's like, yes, you should do that if that's what you want to do. Go for it. I'm like, okay, sure. So the Obermelin rites, the sacred magic of Obermelin, really are sparse on the details of the actual ways to conjure the demons. There's a lot of debate whether or not the tables that are published in the Mathers version are useful or not. Aaron Leach, the rat bastard, has recreated those tables according to his knowledge and understanding of how that all works. But it's still, fundamentally, it's not a complete system. The Den translation of the German manuscript of the Obermelin book was, it filled in a lot of blanks for me. It still doesn't have the actual complete system of conjuring the 4 kings and then all the hierarchies underneath of them, and actually the method to complete the ceremony as it is implied that you were supposed to do, or as I understood that you were supposed to do it, according to the Obermelin rite. So instead of using Obermelin, I looked around for a list of demons that seemed somewhat complete, and I found the Key of Solomon's Goetia, right? The Lemegeton's version of Goetia.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, so I'll just conjure all the demons here. Then I'll get my 4 familiar spirits. There's a complete hierarchy here. There's a conjuration system. Everything is good. And being a greedy Taurus, I immediately went right to Bune, the Duke, who's the only spirit in the entire Goetia of Solomon that is listed to or described as bringing riches to a man. And he also brings eloquence, the ability to speak clearly, which I thought was useful because I was a tech writer at the time. And he also provides the ability to cause flames to appear over sepulchers, which is a necromantic aspect of his spiritness. So anyway, I started working with the Goetia. I dove right into that. And have you looked at the Lemegeton? Have you looked at the key of, or the lesser key in the Lemegeton?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so it's really popular in a lot of circles. If you actually look at it, it's chock full of holes. It was around this time that I started talking on the Solomonic Yahoo group with Aaron Leach, and Tzadkiel was the co-moderator at the time. Brilliant guy. I haven't heard from him lately. But Aaron Leach had basically taken over the group and was running it at that time, and Jake Stratton Kent had started presenting his ideas that are now pretty much mainstream in the grimoire tradition. You got to credit Jake Stratton Kent with breathing new life into Goetia as a actual practice. At the time, what came to me was Jake's rather detailed description of the failures of the Lemegeton's quote-unquote Goetia to actually express Goetia as a practice. And when you look at all the things that are required to do the rites, and you look at the big gaps in the conjurations and the commandments that you're supposed to give these spirits, and when you do a conjuration based on that, you spend half an hour reciting all these stupid prayers and names of God that you don't recognize, and then like 10 minutes talking to the spirit, and it just, to be completely frank, it was too hard. I just couldn't do it. I don't have time to get, I don't have time to get all the wands and daggers and friggin' lion skin belts and all this stuff to do all that stuff. I was like, this is a bunch of crap. So I decided to move away from that particular approach to something simpler. So I started looking around, and at this point I'd figured out that Joe Peterson had the Twilight Grotto website, esotericarchives.com.
Yes.
The best website on the planet.
It's so fantastic. Such a great resource on so many levels. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just started poking around on there, and I started reading Agrippa, and I'd been reading Agrippa for like a year or so at this point. And Agrippa had more information in one chapter than, 6 Llewellyn books that I'd read in the 80s, and 90s. It was amazing how much information was packed in there. And I was researching Agrippa's history, and I was basically trying to figure out what role Kabbalah actually had to play in magic. And I saw a link on there that talked about Agrippa's teacher being Trithemius. So I was like, okay, who's Trithemius? And so I started poking around in Trithemius, and I found out about, the Steganographia, and he was the first cryptologist from the 15th century. It turns out that today, people who work for the NSA in cryptology have to study the Steganographia to understand basic letter substitution codes. And it's...
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, he's still around, and he's still influencing things like, the encryption algorithms that we use to send secure emails to each other. This stuff never went away, So I was like, okay, so Trithemius is pretty badass, and he wrote The Art of Drawing Spirits into Crystals. And I read through it, and it was the most simple conjuration system I'd ever seen. And it was just about conjuring these 7 archangels, and it's planetary angels, planetary hours, and planetary days, and you basically have a table of practice. You've seen Frater Ashen Chasan's book on Through Portals of Stone and Spirit or something like that.
Yes, his first book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, absolutely. Very, very fantastic to read, because he kind of goes through, and he goes by the book, as you know, he's a big grimoire traditionalist, but he also says, this is where I deviate, for instance, creating an altar of the stars for the crystal to set on. He kind of shows where this is what Trithemius wrote, and then this is where he kind of added things on. He kind of makes that distinction, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, he kind of has to, because he has been such a stickler for sticking to the script over the years. He's boxed himself into a corner where any deviation he makes, he has to footnote at this point. I am not a stickler. I made a table of practice that combined like 2 or 3 different aspects of the art of drawing spirits into crystals into one place. I drew it in pencil on paper. I didn't have a orange-sized crystal ball that with a gold background, so I used a coffee cup with some ink in it. And in the hour of the moon on a Monday, because it just happened to be a Monday when I figured out how to do this, I conjured Gabriel, the Archangel of the Moon, and it was just a test. It was just to see if this system worked. And for the first time in my life, a spirit appeared in front of me. I looked down into this stupid coffee mug, and there's the angel's face looking at me, blinking, and saying, guess. And I was like, hi. And he's like, hello. And I had my first experience actually conjuring a spirit and having a spirit be conjured and respond. And I realized at that point that everything I knew about magic was wrong, because I sort of had grown up in the chaos magic theory thing and psychological viewpoint, and it's sort of all in your head, and it's a self-help technique to get to be a better person. And really, if you conjure a demon, then it's just that aspect of yourself. Lon Milo Duquette in the OTO is pretty famous for saying it's all in your head, you just don't know how big your head is, right?
Nice.
So, and that's a nice cover for saying it's all psychological, but in reality, the head that it's all in my opinion, is the nous, the actual, the over mind of which we're all manifestations. So I agree with Lon that it's all in your head, but it's not your head. It's pretty arrogant to say it's all in my personal head. I think that the spirits exist in the same continuum that we do, and they are spirits as individual and separate and living their own lives as every human being on the planet. So I definitely do not subscribe to the psychological model, specifically with conjuration. I do believe
fascinating. Yes, I would love to get into that more, because, as you know, there's always a debate between the objective nature of spirits and this is purely psychological, and it's basically a self-help kind of manual.
Well, see, the problem is that even though they are objective entities, when you work with them, they improve yourself. In my books and my courses, I talk about resonance. If you go into a music store and there are 18 guitars on the wall and they're all somewhat in tune, if you pluck the G string of one of them, all the G strings in the room will vibrate and resonance. It's just how it works. So when you conjure a spirit, all right, so we're going to get into Hermetics real quick. The Hermetic cosmology believes that, or teaches that the mind of God existed, or God itself existed, pure and eternal, across the entire continuum of everything that could possibly be. And then one day it got bored, and it wasn't even a day because it was just an eternity, right? And then it contracted itself out from one space. It withdrew part of itself from that one little aspect of itself. And when that happened, basically all of creation came into being. And I'm going to skip over it because I talk about this all the time, and I get really into it because it explains so much to me. But basically what happened was the 7 celestial spheres formed. There were 7 governors of each of the spheres. The elemental kingdoms formed in the physical world. The physical world is basically what was contracted away from, and the Spirit of God spoke a word, and the word purified the material world, and eventually God made the first human being, the spirit of the first human, and he made it in his own image, right? And this first human loved God because God is perfect, and loved himself because he looks like God, right? And as he went down through the different parts of creation that God had created, he hung out with the governors of each of the 7 spheres, right? So as you descend from the mind of God in Hermetics, it goes from the mind into a word, and then from the word it gets transferred over to the 7 spheres, and the 7 spheres it gets transferred over to the 4 elemental kingdoms, and everything in the material world is a manifestation of the spiritual realm above and everything, right? So, and I'm glossing over all this stuff, but it's all spelled out really clearly in the Divine Pymander, in the Corpus Hermeticum.
Yes.
Everybody should read that. But basically, this human spirit descended down through the ethers and received a portion from each of the 7 governors, that they used to create the world, because they looked at him and saw God, because he was made in the image of God. They fell in love with him, and they were like, dude, let me show you how I Saturn. Let me show you how I Jupiter. Let me show you how to Mars. Dude, check this out. This is the sun. Oh, awesome. Check this out. This is how to Venus. And all the way down through all the spheres, the first human received a portion of the power of creation from each of those 7 governors. And then when he popped his head through into the material world, he saw his own image, or it saw its own image reflected in the waters of the earth, and fell in love. And the earth saw the image of God poking his head through and fell in love with it, and made a form out of clay or mud or something, out of love for the image that it saw. And so the first human saw this image that the spirit of nature had created for it, and consubstantiated and became one with it. And that's why human beings are of a dual nature. We're both mortal and immortal. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, honestly. So getting back to the resonance thing, every time we conjure one of these archangels of the planets, that aspect of ourselves that received that portion of that sphere, the ability to create it, that particular, I guess I want to say energy, just because it's hip and cool. That vibrancy of each sphere gets activated when we are in the presence of the archangel. So as a human being, nobody born in America in 1974 grew up learning that they were part and parcel of the 7 spheres of that predate manifestation. Nobody gets taught that what you speak is what you create. Very few people do. It's not something that you understand, and because you're acting unconsciously most of your life, you don't realize your full potential. And so these different energies in every human being, like every human being in Hermetics, according to Hermetic philosophy, has the potential to create their world as they see fit. They are made in the image of God, and they have all the powers of creation at their beck and call, and they can do it if they want to, but nobody knows how to do it. Nobody's been trained. But when you conjure these archangels, who are the governors of the 7 spheres, you are in their presence, and that part of you that is Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and the Sun and Venus and Mercury and the Moon gets activated. It resonates with that pure energy or vibration of that entity that you've conjured, and it cleanses you, and it clarifies you, and it makes you more powerful in a way to create things that are related to that sphere. So, I worked a lot with Jupiter, and the more I worked with Jupiter, the more I became Jupiter. I found myself part of the Gentlemen for Jupiter Club. We conjured Jupiter once a week for many months, and we all had these wonderful expansions in our personal lives. I got to a point where I could see somebody struggling with things, and I could bless them, where I could say, hey, may the blessings of Jupiter fall upon you. And all of a sudden they would have all these windfalls and opportunities. It wasn't me, the Joshua Gadbois that I am in my civilian life is not some kind of Jupiter priest or anything, but because I'd worked with Jupiter so much, the vibration of Jupiter was manifesting itself around me, and I could direct it into other people's lives, and that's the resonance thing. When the archangels are around you, it purifies you. So there is a self-help and a self-betterment aspect to these conjurations, and it's not, it's easy to see why people think that it's all psychological. You work through the 7 spheres, as I wrote about in my book, and you will have an incredible change in your life. Not everybody. Most people. Well, I don't even want to say most people. I'll say anybody who is actually called to this kind of thing will respond to it. And there is an aspect of that, because there are people who've bought my book and did the work and had absolutely no results. And personally, I think it's because I didn't do it often enough, because each time you do it, you get a little bit more clear, a little bit more purified, a little bit more in harmony with the essences of each of the planets. But, it's a process, so I don't know. I don't want to say that my way works for everybody, but in my opinion, I think it should.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean it does, but
right.
It ought to.
Say there are listeners out there who are very familiar on Esoteric Archives, or by looking at Frauder Tressan's book, very familiar with drawing spirits into crystals. Can you, Rufus, talk about how does the 7 spheres procedures, how do they differ, and how are they similar to the drawing spirits into crystals operation? Because a lot of people might think, oh, well, yeah, there's the element of, say, a crystal ball and drawing spirits into crystals, and the proper day, the proper hour, the circle, the wand, the layman, or the phylactery. Can you talk about the similarities and differences between your 7 spheres book and what many people read with drawing spirits into crystals?
Well, No. Short answer is no. I don't. Frater Ashen Hashan probably has the best or the most detailed description of drawing spirits into crystals as a practical method. If anybody can make it work by the book and by the script, that probably is the best bet to make that happen. I have never been that detail oriented. I just don't have time for it. I don't do magic because I'm some kind of purist who wants to prove that these medieval grimoires are true. That's not what I'm doing this for. I don't do magic to prove magic works. I do magic to make my life better and to create my world as I see fit.
Very good, very good. Now, I can hear people already saying, and I know you've heard this before, but I of course don't want to put words in Frater Ashen Chassan's mouth, but I know that he said in the past, when people ask him, why are you a grimoiric traditionalist, for example, and he mentions that if you don't follow things by the book, let's say, for instance, the ebony wand or the trithemius wand, if you don't do things as laid out in the grimoire, he also brings up the concept of resonances, and that if you don't do it, it's not going to effectively resonate as best as it could. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit, about how you think about that?
All right. You know how houses are wired on 110 volts of electricity?
Yes.
Have you ever measured the electricity coming out of your outlets?
I cannot remember the last time I did that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something we do. We just assume it says 110 on the box, and it says 110 on the things that we plug into it, and 110 is what it should be, right? If you actually measure it, it doesn't always run at 110 volts.
Yeah.
There are fluctuations. Sometimes it's higher, and if it gets too high, it springs the breaker in the box or blows the fuse. There are surges in the power from the power company before it gets to your house. There are brownouts that hit California in the midst of the summer because everybody's running their air conditioning, and it's just drawing too much of the power out, and nobody gets a full 110 volts. The actual voltage that you get out of your outlet is not going to be 110 volts all the time.
Right.
All right. So regardless, when you plug your alarm clock in, it's going to wake you up in the morning. So what I do, or my approach to it, is I assume that the system I've come up with and I understand, and that has been verified by the spirits and my personal experience, it provides an outlet and it provides a plug. And I plug the plug into the outlet and I get the results I want. Whether or not it is the lab environment, pure, definitely 110 volts regulated constantly all the time or not, I don't care. The bottom line is, does my alarm clock wake me up in the morning? Does the Jupiter invocation result in an increase in Jupiter energy, and energy that has been described as Jupiterian across the last 10,000 years of our human existence? Is it consistent with the results that the magicians that wrote this shit down back when they were drawing on cave walls, the Chaldeans? Does it follow what the Chaldeans expressed in their manifestation? Is it consistent with what the spirits in the Greek magical papyri say that they're supposed to do? Is it consistent with what magicians have experienced before? Yes or no? If it is, great. If it's not, toss it out and go on to the next thing. So that's my approach. I have found that I get a lot of flack for trying to simplify magic. Jake Stratton Kent hates that I am always trying to make it easier and easier for people to do magic. And I'm like, dude, everybody should be doing this. Let me make it as easy as possible for everybody, because I'm a tech writer. I come from a tech writer background. I interview subject matter experts, and I take their gobbledygook engineer speak and I turn it into something that any user, Jane Sixpack, can sit down at her computer and use the software program that I'm documenting. That's what I want people to be able to do with magic. And that's why I wrote the 7 Spheres. It's the most simple method of accomplishing what they call the great work that I've ever found, and it's the one that I use. And I'm basically a really simple person. I'm not super intellectual. I'm not an academic. I don't cite sources, and I could if I really thought about it long enough, but it's just not my thing. I really am more interested in the practical, making it work kind of thing. So my approach in 7 Spheres versus like Frater Ashen Hassan, his approach is super detailed. He's like the lab scientific magician, or at least that's sort of the grimoire purist approach. What I do is more, home wiring in the basement with a soldering iron and a thing of 10 solder that you got from Home Depot and maybe a map gas torch, and it's more Radio Shack on a breadboard than it is a lab MIT engineering student's thesis. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And in fact, you bring up a fascinating point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because from what you're saying overall, from kind of an overall perspective, is that the 7 Spheres is basically a rediscovery of the innate nature, divine / not divine, in the kind of hermetic truth of a human being. And by going through each sphere, you're effectively rediscovering those latent aspects of your psyche, your personality, your magical resonance abilities, and you are effectively integrating those energies sphere by sphere until you work your way through all the spheres. Would that be a fair apprehension of your work?
Yeah, that's the goal. That's definitely the thing that you want to have happen. That's what I would like to see everybody do. And when I did it, I found myself able to create an amazingly beautiful reality. I have a great job. I have a great partner. My kids live with me now. I had gone through a divorce and ended up getting custody, and everything worked out perfectly for me, That said, I've had people pay me insane amounts of money to do the same thing for them that I did for myself, and I tried and I failed. So it's like, I cannot say the 7 Spheres will take a regular magician and make them a super powerhouse magician. I can't say that because I have seen it fail. Yeah. I've seen it succeed, 7 times out of 10. But those 3 times out of 10, when it fails, what do? I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're doing it wrong, or maybe if you'd actually worn the lion skin belt, it would have worked better. There's no guarantee. There are people who follow the letter of the Lemegeton's Goetia, the letter of it, and they get nothing. And what they want is visual manifestation, and they don't get it. What was Frater Ashen Hassan's last book that he published? What was it called?
The second book that he published is Gateways Through Light and Shadow. Right.
Okay. So this, in my opinion, is his best work. So I happened to get to read some of his chapters while he was working on it, and
very cool. Very cool.
He also sent a copy to my partner, who is his longtime friend, or acquaintance or something. Anyway, I got to read it, right? And what he did was not anything like what they would do when they were conjuring spirits in, the 1st century AD. It really wasn't. He would sit his scryer down and put him into a hypnotic trance. He actually used induction methods. They would sit there and conjure, and they would scry, and the scryer would express what the spirits were doing, and their experience was much more like the John Dee and Edward Kelly kind of experience, where they received the Enochian system.
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, it was like that, and the visions that they got, we actually sat in a bar in, I think it was in Boulder, and drank a lot. And we talked, him and his friar and my partner and I, and we compared notes, and basically our experiences are the same. If you use my 7 spheres version of things, it takes about 10 minutes once you've been doing it for a while to get through all of the invocation and the spirit's there. And you're just sitting there in a room with the spirit. And then you can spend a half an hour or an hour talking to them, asking them questions, getting responses, hearing things, seeing things, smelling things. The windows rattle, the lights flicker, the candle flames dance. Candles go out that are brand new. Candles are burning for much longer than they should be. These things happen even with my little table of practice. I still have my first table of practice that I drew by hand, with pencil and a compass. And it works. You don't have to do all that stuff, in my opinion. So, when you talk about what the difference is, I don't know. It's a matter of practicality versus, perfectionism,
Gotcha. Sure. And, for those people who are actually very familiar with your book and very familiar with, say, drawing spirits into crystals, they obviously will know the kind of different techniques, equipment, holy implements, things that each uses. For those who have not read yours, but they obviously should, the 7 spheres, can you kind of delineate between, for instance, a spiritus loci, or a place where the spirit shows up? In drawing spirits into crystals, it's an actual, as you say, a tangerine-sized crystal ball. Can you talk about, in your system, what is used? And in Tritemius, there's that ebony wand. In your system, it's different. Can you kind of talk about how there's just different equipment, but as you say, your experience has been, hey, it's getting really good results.
I confess I use a tangerine-sized crystal ball. So,
aha, we finally outed him.
I also use an ebony wand. And the ebony wand is according to the, Trithemius specs. And it was also made by Frater Ashen Hassan.
Ah, well, there you go.
He sent me one. It was one of his first experiments in making magical tools. And he's like, dude, I made this ebony wand. You want it? I'm like, yeah.
It's so fantastic.
So I have this 18-inch, a cubit ebony wand, all engraved in gold, and it's great. And I've used it for, years now. It's wonderful, But my first conjuration was just done with paper and my finger and a stick of incense. The crystal ball I use is full of occlusions. It's not clear. The conjure board that I use is a table of practice that's been wood burned into a cigar box with a hole in the center, and there's an LED light that shows up through the hole in the center and shines up through a focusing mechanism that my partner, who is a PhD in chemistry and has designed scientific equipment for years, she put this together to focus the light directly into the center of the crystal ball that's perched on top of it. And for the light to light up, it has to, there are these 2 electrodes that I place a metal talisman with the archangel or demonic spirit's seal engraved on it, so that it lights up this ball, and it's all part of the ritual. And when I conjure them, I connect their seal to the electrodes, and it lights up the crystal ball, and it focuses the energy in the room, and you can just feel the presence of the spirit radiate into the ethers, and that's pretty fucking hokey. There's not one lionskin belt, but there are batteries.
Well, that is certainly a very, shall we say, colloquial way to put it. Yes, sir.
Right. So, it's... So I guess I really don't follow the book as clearly as maybe I should, but I get really good results. I'm much more interested in getting magicians in the presence of spirits to experience what the spirits have to say to them. I think that is the ultimate value of magic. I don't think magic is really good at honestly, magic doesn't make your world better. All it really does, in my opinion, is grant you the insight, awareness, wisdom, and ability to influence your world the way you want it to manifest. And yeah, we get all these occult secrets and we have all these occult powers, and big deal. I don't know. Have you been doing magic for a while?
I have practiced with Dr. Thomas Rudd's 9 angelic invocations. That also, stipulates a crystal ball flanked by 2 candles, and I found incredibly powerful experiences from those. But ironically, and I really want to ask you about this, because as you say, it's about 10 minutes, whereas in Dr. Rudd's system, kind of echoing John Dee's system, the invocations are incredibly, incredibly long, and they go on for about 5 pages. And so if you're conjuring a spirit or invoking a spirit in a day and hour, as you said, it almost begs to ask the question, well, how much time would I have, say, with the spirit? Is longer always better? Does it help induce a positive state of trance that Aaron Leach talks about? What are your whole thoughts on that?
Aaron Leach is the biggest poser on the planet. I would just like to let everybody know that. I hope you're recording me on this one. I want that one published for sure. He is a complete poser and also my nemesis and one of my very best friends. So
I was just about to say we need to have you and Aaron on at the same time.
Oh my God. It's going to go something like it'll be terrible. It'll be terrible for everyone because we will be
Clash of the Titans.
We will just be making jokes the whole time. He's a complete loser, and he's wrong about everything except for the things that he agrees with me on.
Oh boy. Well, now of course Aaron's not here, but I could probably hear Aaron saying, "Well, wait a second. When it comes to something like the length of an invocation and the shamanic roots of engaging in a state of trance, heighten with resonance, wouldn't that make a difference?" The argument goes.
Sure. And putting yourself into a trance like Frater Ashen Hashan did with his scryer. Hypnosis. All these things are great. I've gotten into the OTO and the AA a lot more than I used to be when I was writing Seven Spheres. And, you've got, if you're familiar with 777?
Yes.
It's like fucking 300 different goddamn columns of corresponding elements and angels and demons and friggin' times of day and it goes on and on and on. And each one of those columns I used to think was total crap, because of course I'm a very simple person. But, there's very specific exercises that you're prescribed in the AA. And when you do them, it turns out that it's like going to the gym, and you start working out and you have muscles and you can use them to lift heavy things. And it's like, oh, okay. In the same way you do these silly rituals that Crowley came up with every day, the way he prescribes, and you end up having these psychic muscles and these correspondences. His method of conjuring Mercury is to take 777 out and go across the Mercury line and grab the incense and the perfume and the colors, and you set up your temple in the right colors and the smells and the right jewels and the right hours of the day, all this stuff, and dancing girls. I guess that would be for Venus, but you incorporate all the different symbols of the planet or energy that you're trying to conjure in the temple space, and then you create a resonance that basically draws that spirit to you. So yeah, there is that, but that's sort of self-hypnosis, and
okay.
That's my opinion. There might be something metaphysical. I mean, I've been wrong so many times across my entire career, and I hesitate to even say anything in an absolute anymore. But in my opinion, or currently, as I think right now, it's just self-hypnosis. You know, you're putting yourself in a state where you can sense the spirit because you believe it's there. You know, but when I sat there at my oh my God, I really wish I could describe my dining room table when I did my first conjuration. It was like third-hand crap. I mean, it was a big piece of glass on these two things that looked like tombstones. It was definitely from the 1980s. It was super chic. And, I mean, this was in 2006. So I'm like sitting there on this like glass table with the green edges and everything, you know, and the spirit appears before me, and it was just the most humbling moment of my life and the most empowering moment of my life, you know, and it was just so pure and good, even though it was just a piece of paper with pencil scratches on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not. I definitely think that all of the lead up and the conjurations and all that stuff is useful and good, because I have to confess, I come across as a non-grimoire purist often, but in point of fact, I have done grimoire conjurations to spec, in public, at the lodge, in full priest regalia, and it was amazing. Okay. When I was done, you know, and I did it in front of an audience, and they participated in scrying, and at the end, we all talked about what we saw, and everybody had extremely similar experiences. Everybody saw the spirit in the same place in the temple when it showed up, you know. And I went through all of the conjurations of the Lemegeton. I mean, like all three of them. It took fucking forever. It was not my preferred method of conjuration, I've got to say. But it was super effective for an audience, you know. It put them in the right frame of mind. It put me in the right frame of mind. And I hate the whole, I command you by the name of blah, 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 show up and blah, 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 and by blah, 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 you know. But because we're all OTO now in this little group of magicians that I work with most often, you know, we do these weekly rituals of the Mass, you know, and the Mass involves, you know, chanting names in Greek and, you know, calling on spirits of the dead and, you know, putting all this stuff together. We're all used to that. So when you see somebody dressed up like a priest doing these conjurations, you know, chanting these names of Athanatos and Abrasax and Abratos, you know, Iao, and when you're conjuring these spirits in these names, it definitely puts you in the right frame of mind. I get the value of it, and it is effective, and the spirits do show up, and they do manifest, and they do materialize in their own way, and they do affect the world. But you strip all that stuff away, and you just call the spirit by its name and its seal, and you have a much better conversation. You know, you're not setting yourself up as the master and commander. You're not setting yourself up as this pure and holy entity that has nothing to do with who you are on your daily basis. You know, I mean, I called myself Moses. You know, I am Moses, your prophet. I received the secrets of Chem. You know, the mysteries of Chem, the mysteries of Israel. You know, I've done all that stuff, and it is effective in its own way. But it's not the most useful experiences I've had. The most useful experiences I've had were just, hey, Pyman, I need to talk to you. By your name and your seal, I call you. Because I had already conjured him, you know. I'd conjured him using the art of drawing crystals, whatever, you know, my 7 spheres method. And we'd already talked, and we'd established that he would come back when I called him. And I was like, dude, I need to talk to you about this relationship I'm having at work, and I just need some insight, and I need a little bit of you know, favor. And he's like, dude, the problem is this, and it was just a conversation between coworkers, or friends or acquaintances who understand that each has something to offer, and the most simple method of conjuring spirits that I know of is a candle, a stick of incense, and the symbol, and something to look at while you're talking to them. It's useful to go through all of those detailed conjurations the first time. It's useful to go through all of that stuff when you're establishing relationships with them. But the actual value of your relationship with the spirit comes from how you work with them after that. It's like if you wanted to meet the president, you'd have to go through so many hoops and jumps, and you'd have to know someone who gets you in the right place, and you end up invited to the right place at the right time. You meet him and you shake his hand, and somehow you have to make an impression at the right point that he'll actually listen to you later, and now you have a very powerful friend. Yeah. It's like that. But once you have your powerful friend and he gives you his cell phone number, you just call him up and say, hey, look, this is what I'm going through. How would you deal with it? How can you help me with this? Can you help me with this? Is this something you'd be interested in helping me with? What would it take what would I need to bring to the table to make this happen? And the whole 7 spheres approach is basically about establishing a network of coworkers that know more than you do, who are interested in making you succeed, and making them happy as well. And basically what makes them happy is super simple shit from our side. You buy them a bouquet of flowers and you put it by their seal.
Yes. I know, to mention Aaron Leach again, I know the book Ritual Offerings, talks about that a lot, where, and I think you've articulated this very well in terms of developing that relationship. Can you talk about that in terms of things that Aaron talks about with ritual offerings? What role do they play in your practice, especially someone of your caliber who, you've authored the 7 spheres, you have a lot of experience both in and out of lodge magic. Do you find that ritual offerings plays a really strong role in your day-to-day or ceremonial activities?
Yeah, actually, I wrote a chapter in the ritual offerings.
Oh, that's right. Of course. That's right.
Mine focused on the genius loci. But yeah, ritual offerings are part and parcel of the whole thing. Jake Stratton-Kent brings this pact-based approach to goetic magic that he thinks is the end-all be-all, and I don't disagree with him. I think he's probably right, but I think he's beating the drum too loud over that one. I think it's just sort of common sense. When you are going to work with anybody, if you're going to put together a community action group that is going to try to, like we're doing a pagan pride booth, or not pagan pride, just a pride booth at the Pride March here in Minneapolis with our lodge. To make that happen, we talked to people in our lodge who were interested. We gave them food. We put out pizza, and we drew all the active spirits that were interested. We put together a plan. We fed money to the printing press to make our banners and our flyers and all that stuff. And we actually have this awesome booth that's going to go up this weekend. And we're going to do some outreach, and we're going to tell people that not only is it cool to be gay or whatever you are, it's the law, That's what Thelema is all about. Do it, though it should be the whole of the law. If you are gay, by God, be gay. That's what you should be doing, and nobody has the right to tell you anything different. And that's what we want people to know, is that we support you in that. Thelema is a place where you can come and enjoy that. Blah 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 blah. Right? But the fact is that that's how spirit magic works too. You have a whole cadre of entities that you work with. There's nothing that you want to have happen as a magician that is going to take place entirely in the sphere of Jupiter. If you want money, guess what? Saturn has to set the boundaries of the manifestation of money, a beginning and an end, because otherwise you're going to have more and more stuff coming in and more stuff to do that you can't take care of. So you need to put a cap on it, a limit. So that's Saturn. Jupiter, you need to fill up that space that Saturn has enclosed for the manifestation of your idea. Mars, you have to actually discipline yourself and cut off things that will suck away the energy that will be needed to make it manifest. The sun, you have to project it into the universe. Venus, something has to receive it. The seed has to get planted. It has to grow. It has to sprout. It needs nutrients from the dead stuff that came before, Mercury, it has to actually be integrated with everything. There has to be some intellect going on in there. The moon, it has to take form. It has to wax and it has to wane. All these aspects of creation happen with every magical act that you're going to do. And if you don't have contacts in all 7 spheres, or if you don't have the work put in to clarify those aspects of yourself, you're gonna stumble and fall along the way because you don't really know what you're doing. You're the amateur.
Dr. Stephen Skinner mentioning in an interview somewhere about the Greco-Egyptian practice of if you fail to engage with the spirit at the proper day and hour, you would be seen to the spirits as uninitiated, as someone who is just kind of, you're kind of just playing by the seat of your pants and you're not really getting anywhere.
It's like trying to get into a club if you don't have an invitation. Either you have to bamboozle the door guard or you have to have an invitation. Otherwise, you don't get in. Sometimes you have to bribe them. So,
well, though, just pile on the ritual offerings, and maybe it'll work.
So yeah, the ritual offerings go a long way for all that stuff. But basically, in my experience, it's not paying them off as much as it is just doing your part. Like when you put the bundle of flowers next to a seal, the spirits aren't getting paid. It's just, it's almost like a reflection of your relationship. I appreciate you is what you're saying when you make an offering. And who wants to work with someone who doesn't appreciate them?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, and I'm sure that yourself and Aaron Leach have talked about this so much, but for those who aren't familiar, I remember speaking with Aaron about this exact issue, and he mentioned that for a spirit to manifest or to engage with you on, in the sphere of Malkuth, let's say, just during a ritual, it requires a vast amount of energy. And so the offerings, the incense, the appropriate words, the energy directed towards that entity helps the entity, feed the entity basically in a very positive way to kind of engage with you. Is that something that you also subscribe to?
Nah, not really.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
No, he's he comes from his shamanic / actually his wife's shamanic influence and his wife's experience in, I think it's Palo or Santero or something.
Yes, Aaron's exactly. He's written about that a lot in his Secrets book as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, his wife has served to inform him quite well on some aspects of things, but he's also very Golden Dawn. Do you know how Golden Dawn he is, or is that a secret?
Oh no, I think he's mentioned about his work with the Ciceros and him working through the Golden Dawn system for sure.
Okay, well, we'll just leave it at that. But he's super freaking Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn approach to things, and Crowley picked up on all this stuff too, and it gives me heartburn sometimes. But the approach is, if you see something working in a magical setting, then you need to categorize it, quantify it, and replicate it. It's a very scientific Illuminism approach to things, and that's useful in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it denigrates the relationship. It's like if you buy your wife flowers on her birthday, and it makes her happy, and you have a wonderful conversation throughout the day, and you make love that night, and it's a wonderful experience. walking away from that and saying, okay, if I get exactly 12 roses with 13 blossoms of baby's breath and 2 pieces of greenery, then I will have sex. That misses out on the entire relationship. The entire gratitude that's being expressed between 2 people and 2 spirits who happen to be in the flesh at the same time. And I think this quantification and I just think it sucks the life out of magic. The over-scientification. I don't know. I just think it's overthought, and it just you can't say, if I wear these items and have this wand that was pulled off the tree at this day and hour, you can't demand from the spirits. You can't say, I got you a dozen roses and they had the same number of baby's breath and the same number of greenery in it, so now you have to have sex with me. That doesn't work. And I think that Aaron's approach to it is very scientifically based, or hopefully. I mean, I don't know. He's like the hopeful scientist. Like, maybe this will work, but I don't think he kind of gets it. I think he just misses out on that visceral, energetic joy of having a relationship with the spirit. And to me, it's relationship. It's not religion. All these grimoire purists and people who try to say, if you give XYZ, then you will get ABC. I think they're missing the point. It's not that. It's spirit likes XYZ, and, spirit is into ABC, and why don't you bring XYZ and see if maybe ABC will work for you, It's a much more personal and fluid kind of relationship thing when you get into the very depths of magic,
We'll have to have Aaron back on to, share some thoughts on it, but I kind of see echoes in both of what you're saying and in what Aaron's saying, because I think, you're obviously mentioning, hey, it's about relationships. It's about exactly, building a rapport between 2 entities, be they human, be they spiritual and human, etc. And it's about cultivating that relationship. And I know that Aaron's written about, I think he has a whole chapter in his book on devotional magic and on the ability for whoever the mage is to literally devote themselves in an almost Agrippa, quote-unquote, frenzy with a PH, a kind of frenzy that just overtakes everything, with this kind of just overwhelming energy. So I kind of see both you and Aaron, saying things, perhaps it's in a different way, because I certainly take your point about you're going to want the relationship above all else, but I know that Aaron's kind of echoed that as well.
Yeah, he's all right.
Yeah, he's all right. There you go.
Sometimes he gets it, but
sometimes he gets it. Yeah. Well, okay. So Rufus. Obviously, someone of your experience, what works. That from your experience, the choices you made in terms of not, say, going exactly by the book is okay, because you're getting the results that you want. This leads to something that I wanted to ask you that Dr. Stephen Skinner talks about, which is, at least in the kind of, zero, well, I guess the year 0, 100 AD to 100 AD back to 200 BC, but around the Greco-Egyptian period, Dr. Skinner talks about the differences in one of his books between the 3 spheres of spiritual engagement at the time, which you had religion, which was extremely public, and you were petitioning a god. You were saying, pretty please, can you help us with this? And then there was magic, which was the opposite, and it was extremely private. And instead of petitioning a spiritual entity, you were literally engaging with it and getting it to do something for you in a variety of ways. And that was mostly on material side of things, so, satisfying love or power or wealth. But then in between those two, the Greco-Egyptians had, as you know far more than I, the mystery tradition. And instead of going after just material stuff, as in basic magic, or in terms of going to the public square and asking God for something, the mystery tradition is like this huge elevation of consciousness, very hard to describe, where it's not really after material aims at all. I mean, for someone like you with your Seven Spheres book, where do you see the role of all of these rituals? Is it specifically about a rediscovery that can lead to creating a better material reality? Is it more kind of the mystery tradition in the classical sense, where you're elevating your consciousness? Is it both? How do you see those?
All right. If you really want to get down to the core meat of the matter, the Seven Spheres book that I wrote is pretty materially focused, right? I talk about kingdoms. I talk about making yourself a king, whether you're male or female, whatever, however you identify yourself, a king being the ruler of their realm. What is it going to take for you to become the king, to be the one that says, I want this to happen, and based on your knowledge of your kingdom and its current state, you know that you can make it happen, and you have the resources you need to make it possible in the material realm. Okay, so that's
that material side, yes.
Oh yeah, that's the appeal of the Seven Spheres, in my opinion. I think that was what I wanted people to see and grasp and buy it. I wanted them to buy it to make their world better in every way that they wanted. People want to have money, a decent house, a car that runs, and sex. And that's all the things that, in my opinion, the Seven Spheres can provide, but it's kind of a scam, because I'm not really interested in making people a bunch of entitled idiots.
So with great magic comes great responsibility, as one would say.
Right. And I happen to know from brutal personal experience that if you go through the Seven Spheres, you're not going to come out of it a pretentious dickwad. It doesn't work that way. You end up being humbled in the presence of the powers of creation in ways that you can't describe to anybody. You have those mystery tradition experiences with entities that have existed for millennia before you and will be around for millennia afterwards. Your momentary consciousness, your momentary individualization is put into perspective against the backdrop of not only the temporary manifestation of the Seven Spheres and the four elements and the Ein Sof and Ein Sof Or and Ein and all that crap. It's put into perspective against the backdrop of complete and utter nothingness. The thing about the Seven Spheres, the gotcha of Seven Spheres, is if people actually do it and it works for them, they're not going to come out of it some entitled, powerful, egotistical asshat. They're going to come out of it a humble, compassionate, caring human being who's fully aware of their potential and fully aware of the potential of every other human being on the planet, with respect for every other person. The point of the Seven Spheres book was to kind of get people to do the magic because it makes you a better person. It really does. If you do this stuff and you adopt it and you make it a part of yourself, you actually become a better human being. You care about your neighbor. You care about the person across the street. You are careful with your children. You're careful with your pets. You're careful when you drive. All this stuff. It actually changes who you are, and it makes you a better person. And the Seven Spheres book was my attempt to change a very small percentage of the world, because basically, I think they printed 1,000 copies, and PDF, maybe a million people have access to it. That would be great. But if 1 million people do the work and change themselves as a result of doing the work and experiencing the presence of friggin' Haniel of Venus, we're going to have an incredibly powerful group of people working on the planet to make the world a better place for other people, And it's sort of that was sort of my intent there, was to yeah, you want a car, a house, and a lover, but do you really want a car and a house and a lover, or do you just want to be happy? You know?
Yes, very good phrasing. And you know, this touches on something that Jake Stratton Kent, Aaron Leach, Frater Ashton Chassan, when I've spoken with them, that they all touch on. They all mention two things that I believe you're echoing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on. One is the efficacy of sincerity. In other words, you can't BS your way around something. You can't fake when you're in the presence of a spirit. Obviously, the spirit knows what's going on. You can't feign interest or devotion that's necessary to make something work. That's one thing they say, is that sincerity, it's so important. And the other thing, when I ask people, and I'm going to ask you too, of course, they mention in terms of the biggest tips for especially a fledgling or a rookie, someone who is literally just kind of dipping their toe in the occult waters, is just to do it, just to slide off the armchair,
right,
and stop being an armchair magician. Although, as Dr. Stephen Skinner says, those people are great because, gosh, there's a lot more people. That means that there's that many more people talking about it, which is good in a way. But sliding off the armchair and actually stepping into the circle. Can you talk about those two elements, about sincerity and, to quote Nike, just doing it, and just why is that important?
Jake and I have a very interesting relationship, in my opinion. I have for years thought that he was, the bee's knees, one of the best occult speakers and studiers and students and practitioners in our generation. I have nothing but admiration for Jake in terms of his work. As a personality, he and I often butt heads, and it's kind of dumb, honestly. The two of us actually should just drink together and make fun of people. I think we would be best suited for that. But the other day, he published something about how he will never produce a hands-on do-it-yourself grimoire, because he believes, and if you read through Geosophia and the True Grimoire and Pandemonium and all of his amazing works that he's published, it's guideposts. It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Greek Natural Papyri, the Hitchhiker's Guide to Goetia. It's not turn left on this street, blah, blah, blah. It's in this town they do this, and over here they have these symbols, and over here they have those rites, and over here they enshrined this hero. His approach is not to teach people how to do magic. It's to inspire people to figure out how to do magic. And his personal approach is all relationship based. Pact, whatever. So.
And you're saying that differs from, say, the Seven Spheres, where instead of a guidepost, it specifically walks you through how to do these things.
Well, yeah. Mine is the Tech Writer's Guide to Hermetic Magic, and we have a completely different approach to the cosmology thing. He does not appreciate Neoplatonism at all, whereas I embrace it fully. So,
yes.
And this gets down to preference and what works for you. And I like to call it, what you're chosen to do. But your original question was about
the importance of sincerity and just doing it. Just, there comes a tipping point about reading about something and literally getting the chalk, getting the wand, doing it in the day and hour, and just jumping in.
Right. So the other day, Jake posted something about how he will never produce a step-by-step guide, but he encourages people to burn their fingers. He says, magic isn't a hands-off thing. You have to get into it and do it. And all I want to do is tell people different ways that they can jump in and do it. And his material has been a a huge fertile garden for me. A lot of my nature spirit work that I've done has been based indirectly on conversations I've had with him about heroes and what makes Agathos Daemon, things like that. But it is a burn your fingers and learn approach that he recommends. To just do it, get out there and get in the ring. And for me, I always like the magic circle as a boxing arena approach. Get in the ring.
I like that.
Get in the ring, bro. You want to talk about all this stuff, but get in the ring, prove it. What's your experience actually show you? And I actually believe that experience will bring everybody to my level. When it comes down to it, one of our local body members here in the OTO, Scott Michael Stenwick, he has an incredibly detailed presentation of Enochian magic. He's got mastering the heptarchy. He's a brilliant author, and he's a brilliant magician, and he does all of our equinox rites, and he does all of our solstice rites, and he does, for the lodge, for the community. And he is just one of the most intelligent human beings I've ever met, but at the same time, we do things completely differently. But we have the same conversations with the spirits. We can talk about how when we just do it, it's actually the same thing, whether it's with all the ritual or his approach to the ritual. He believes in this operant field thing with the vanishing rituals of the pentagram and the hexagram, and you do the invoking thing and blah, blah, blah. And I've been at the rituals where he does all this stuff, and it's super effective. You leave in tears because of the power of the spirits and the energies that are being invoked in this ritual. It's brilliant. It's beautiful, but I honestly, I have a hard time ever doing anything like that because I'm not that meticulous about things. I don't have the whole Enochian table or great table or whatever it's called, and he has one that he brings to the lodge.
I got you. So you're saying basically that when it really comes down to it, when you really, really separate all of the talk and all of the suggestions from people outside of your own consciousness, when it really comes down to it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it really just depends on what works specifically for you. So for one person, there could be, say, the Seven Spheres approach where, hey, you're going to get this equipment, you're going to do it, you're just going to aim for that kind of direct interaction. It's not going to be, by the books written 500 years ago, letter by letter by letter, and that will get results. And then someone else might say, well, I really enjoy, learning the entire Heptameron invocations in the original ecclesiastical Latin, and I think that going by the book, literally by the book, and reciting the entire thing in Latin will get me the same results. Is that fair?
Sort of, but that gets back to the sincerity part of your question, right?
Okay.
So you got to find what resonates with you. That's my basic opinion on that. Find a system that makes sense to you. All the systems that work, that are effective, tend to have some things in common. Some kind of hierarchy, some kind of relationship establishment. And the True Grimoire, Jake Stratton Kent writes about how with Skirlin you have to have a pact that you seal with your own blood. That establishes a relationship. In Crowley's system, you do Liber Samak until you have attained knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel. And basically, that's just getting his name. And once you get his name, that begins the relationship in the same way that getting married begins your relationship with your partner. It's not the end, it's the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So So there's different ways to establish the relationship. There's different ways to pursue the relationship. Culturally, psychologically, your upbringing, your genetics. I mean, speaking as a white man, I have a completely different approach to things than Christopher Bradford, who is a black man. And he is one of the most powerful and amazing magicians I know. And we do things completely different. He's Palo, and he's Golden Dawn. He's Palo. He's got hoodoo roots. And his approach to things is tradition-based and culturally based, and it's different than mine, but it's the same spirits, and we have the same conversations with each other. I'll say, hey, I plugged my metal talisman into my electrodes and conjured Sadkiel, and he's like, yeah, right on. I used the seventh ray of whatever, of Siete Reyes or whatever. I don't know. I don't actually know what I'm talking about, so don't think I actually am pretending like I know what Palo people do. But, we can communicate about the results in ways that are meaningful, because regardless of the approach, it's the practice that we have in common, So the sincerity matters, but there's also all these other factors that have to be brought into account, I mean, somebody who is anti-Christian and anti-establishment and anti-patriarchy is not going to have the great results of following a Catholic or a Protestantized version of Catholic rituals. They're just not gonna be able to do it, because they've got all of this baggage that they're bringing to the circle with them. But when you're going into the ring and you're going to fight, if you're going to actually do the thing that you're there to do, you actually have to bring yourself and nothing else. You have to be there, so you have to find a system that works with you. You have to be sincere, but you also have to have a system that resonates with your own sincerity. For me, it's always going to be about relationship. It's always going to be about finding a way to connect with the entity that you're conjuring, and for people who are scared to death of magic, by all means, go with the Lemegeton's Goetia. Hell yeah, bind them, put them in a box, threaten to burn them. They don't really care. They don't really give a crap. They just want to have a moment of your time. And if it takes all that stuff to have a moment of your time, then by all means do it. Because once you're in their presence, there's this resonance thing that happens. Nobody who stands in a magical circle with all the protective circle things, the 10 spheres spelled out and all that stuff, they're not safe. You're not going to conjure some demon from the pits of hell and not have its influence resonate within you, because we are everything. We are the manifestation of the combination of the hexagram and the pentagram. The reason that Thelemites believe 11 is the magic number is because it's 6 plus 5. The 6 pointed star and the pentagram. If you look at the pinnacle of the Goetia, of the Lemegeton's Goetia, it's got a 5-pointed star and tetragrammaton written out around it. That's the 4 and the 5 combined. The 4-letter name of God written in 5 parts, tetragrammaton. There's this combination of seeming opposites, the above and the below, the balanced and the unbalanced. These things all come together in magic, and you have to find your connection to that balance point. And if it's something that's super complicated, go for it. Do it. 777 is super complicated. All of my most intelligent magical friends understand 777 way more than I ever will. It's just not for me. I'm not the academician. You know what I mean? Academian. Yeah. Whatever. I'm not the scholar that's going to understand, all the different aspects of Hecate in the Greek magical papyri. That's just not my interest. But, I read the Corpus Hermeticum, and I see the conjuration of the supernatural assistant, and I see the conjuration of the Agathos Daemon and Themis, and, it resonates with me, and I'm able to use that stuff, and I have the results that I can compare with people who are into all that stuff.
What would be the 2 or 3 other really big things that you would want to impart to this person? Or asked another way, what are 2 or 3 really big things that they should definitely not do? What are some of the pitfalls they should avoid?
Okay. All right, so first of all, don't check your brain out at the door. Agrippa teaches that Saturnine animals in the material world are created from basically fecund soil. So if you put out a pile of horse shit, you're going to get flies out of it. At the time that he wrote that, they believed in abiogenesis, that bugs were created from crap. They didn't understand about eggs. They didn't understand about life cycles. They didn't understand all that stuff. He has whole chapters devoted to things like the way a leopard changes its spots over the years. It's crap. It's crap science. Lions are afraid of roosters. Lions aren't afraid of roosters. Lions eat roosters. They don't give a shit. It's full of period-specific beliefs that were scientific at the time that are no longer useful. So don't check your brain at the door. Remember that we have continued to progress since the 1st through 3rd centuries AD. The Greek magical papyri is great and everything, but it's also based on their understanding of the world that they had at the time. And we have progressed a long way since then. So, in light of that, don't think that everything you read in a grimoire and the practices of a grimoire are actually the way things work. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that if you don't have a lion skin belt and a almond wand, and if you cut it off, a couple minutes after the sun came up, that it's not going to be any use. They don't give a crap about that stuff. It's actually culturally specific. Understand that what you're reading is another culture approach to the spiritual realm that you're not a part of. Understand it as an anthropologist. Look for things that speak to you and try to understand it. And at the same time, don't just go with whatever I think it really means. Don't trust yourself, but also don't trust the text. Trust the spirits. Try to work with the spirits themselves. So that's one pitfall. Don't put too much confidence in your own understanding, but at the same time, don't pretend like people who didn't understand electricity trying to describe Trithemius's ever-burning lights.
Yes.
It's not going to make any sense. Trithemius might have had a way of creating a phosphorus filament that would burn with a Baghdad potato battery. He might have had something like that. But that doesn't mean that he had spiritual access, and if you do these incantations, you're going to have an ever-burning light. It's not going to happen, So you got to keep your intelligence and your intuition and your hopes and dreams sort of all kind of balanced. Yes, we all want Boone to bring us $5 billion tomorrow so we never have to work again. He never does. He never has, and he never will. And it's important to understand that. It doesn't mean he's not great at helping you with money. It just means don't take it at face value, but at the same time, look for what it actually means in your current circumstances. So, keep your head on your shoulders. Don't be dumb is sort of the first thing. The second thing I would advise is definitely get in the ring, get in the magic circle, conjure some spirits, try it, try whatever works for you, try whatever resonates with you. If it doesn't work, try something else, The most important thing that I would like to tell everybody about magic is that there's nothing that you can create with magic that you cannot uncreate with magic. You can't create a situation in your life where you are so screwed up that you are screwed for life. You cannot screw yourself over completely with magic. So whatever you raise with magic, you can put down with magic. It's not that hard. Every system has a banishing ritual. Every system. And if you do something from the PGM where there's no obvious banishing ritual, well, guess what? There's probably something in the PGM that lets you get in touch with a supernatural assistant who can banish that crap for you. There's the headless rite, which is basically designed to get rid of all ills. You can apply that to whatever spiritual situation you're in. There's no system of magic that you can use that you can actually screw yourself over with for life. You are completely free to experiment, and if it doesn't work, you'll find something to fix it. You can't do any wrong with this. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's ethical things that will screw you over in time, but even that turns out to be just a wisdom gaining experience,
Yeah, absolutely.
In the worst case scenario, you'll come out of it knowing more than you did when you went into it, and this whole thing should be, in my opinion, all of magic should be considered an ongoing process, something that never ends. To this day, I still do the 7 spheres. I work with all the spirits, and I continue to ask them for deeper initiation into each of the spheres. I'm not done. I've won. I said the other day on one of the Jake Stratton Kent threads, I said, I won this magic game, and people are still telling me I'm wrong. You can tell me I'm wrong. You can make fun of me. You can tell me that all the things that I do are wrong and that there's no way I could possibly have enjoyed all the benefits that I've enjoyed, but nevertheless, I've enjoyed those benefits. I actually accomplished the great work. I have attained a level of understanding and experience and practical applications that let me create my world as I see fit, and that's something I do on a regular basis. I'm not just an observer, and it works for me. And the 7 spheres stuff is the start of it. It's a start for it, but it never ends. I'm still learning. I'm not done yet. I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet.
I think I'll go for a walk. I guess the most important thing is to do the magic, experiment with it, and don't think that any of your experiences are the end. It keeps going and it never stops. And if it stops, chances are you're probably wrong.
Don't leave your brain at the door. Make sure to never stop seeking, and just step in the ring. Just get in the circle and do
it. Yeah. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be scared, because, like I said, there's nothing you can call up with magic that you can't put down with magic. And if you have the power to screw your life up, you have the power to fix it.
Rufus Opus, thank you just so much for taking the time and joining us on the podcast today. We really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'm sure I'm not done yet.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Glitch Bottle Podcast and helping us uncork the uncommon this fine day or night, or wherever you happen to occupy space-time in your occult lairs, your summoning towers, or your cloistered libraries of the esoterically awesome. You can check out previous episodes and other magical Glitch Bottle news on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, and you can download episodes on our blog, glitchbottle.blogspot.com. Please make sure also to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, and also you can follow us on Twitter at glitchbottle, all one word. Our intro music is the track Tornado by David Zeste. Our magical interest is fueled by sincerity, passion, amazing guests, and a copious amount of clinking coffee cups. Until next time, this is Alexander F. reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.